Hello, and welcome to TEQ. Today, we are going to be talking about generative AI and trying to explain both the magic and how we're going to try and set boundaries so that we feel that we get the most of it without having to deal with the negative ramification that this technology could have. And by now, if you have not been living under a rock, I'm sure, have come across generative AI, which is a branch of artificial intelligence that can create new content for you. Anything from images to text to music. It can help with productivity and so much more. All the big names in tech, from Microsoft to Google, obviously ChatGPT, have been working on different features and solutions that take advantage of this technology. But the application has both, as I was mentioning, benefits, but also some challenges and risks. And today, with my guest, I want to try and tackle some of the questions that we really all, especially the companies that are developing this technology, think about in terms of, figuring out how can we bring generative AI into all these aspects of our world in an ethical and responsible way. And what are the guardrails that we need to put in place so that both from a regulatory perspective and a societal perspective, we feel that we don't have a blind spot? Today, my guest is amazing. Is somebody that I've come to know after her moment on stage at the latest Intel event. Her name is Ria Cheruvu, and she is an ethics lead architect at Intel. I mean, just the title itself blows my mind. But her role at Intel is to actually productize ethical and explainable AI technologies. And she has a master's degree in data science from the University of Harvard. And she is an instructor of data science curricula as well. She also happens to be a published poet, a child's book author, and a neuroscientist enthusiast. Welcome, Ria. I'm so excited to have you join us today.
Thank you, Carolina, for the wonderful introduction. Super excited to be here and talk to you.
You and I talked about after your moment on stage at Intel that everybody appreciated so much. We talked about some of the kind of the love and excitement and fear and apprehension that there is around AI. And for the audience that maybe is not so familiar with AI ethics and explainability, can you tell us a little bit why this matter and what it is that you do in this sphere?
I'd love to. So I've been kind of living and breathing ethical AI for the past 2 years or so. And as part of that, I've kind of come to recognize that ethical AI is a socio-technical domain. There's a lot of different aspects that add to it, but it is basically looking at the societal impact of this technology that is rapidly changing, has a variety of different capabilities, and is also being used for different use cases. We see explainable AI as a very neat subset of ethical AI that is actually starting to look into how can we better explain what is going on within AI models, and explain them to the users or the stakeholders that are impacted by these systems.
So you're saying explainability is a kind of a subset of ethics, right?
Yes, and that's one way to perceive it. That's, I think, a very popular way of looking at it. There's definitely a little bit of debate around what I just said. The neat kind of puzzle piece of explainability and ethics, is it bigger than that? How is it related to concepts like transparency and accountability? But I think the best way to look at it is essentially looking at it as a part of AI ethics. Considering the bigger picture at large.
And when you say ethics, I think that people kind of oversimplify and say, okay, it's good and bad, right?
Right.
But there's more to it. So can you tell us a little bit more, kind of a range of things that would fall under ethical AI?
Sure thing. So explainability is definitely one of them. Fairness is another, and I think Carolina, that's directly speaking to kind of the moral compass kind of part where you are starting to get into okay, is this technology discriminating against certain populations, and who is leveraging the technology, and for what use cases. So I think fairness is definitely a very key and core part of AI ethics. There's also sustainability and additional domains like security, safety, and privacy. And I know that's a mouthful already, but all of these domains are kind of contributing to the way that AI is impacting our society in a positive way, and is also, more trustworthy. And just to speak to that point, again, a point of confusion, but I think it's also a kind of interesting part of ethical AI. There's a lot of different terms and vocabulary that's being put out there. For example, ethical, responsible AI, trustworthy AI, etc. All of it is centered around intentions and also the impact of these systems, but they each have their own kind of distinguished definitions, which makes it altogether very interesting for us to look at and think about what is the broad impact of AI ethics beyond even just thinking about it as altruism or doing good versus bad.
Mm.
So.
Because also that links to, I mean, apart from the fact that your brain is just amazing, but
Thank you.
it's true. And you make it, what I love about talking to you is the fact that, I obviously have no background in AI and I can understand it without feeling that you're talking down to me. So I'm sure that the audience appreciates that as well, which is a gift
Thank
that, that you have.
thank you.
What you were saying, it reminds me also, it makes me think about sometimes we tend to not distinguish the technology from the business model or the purpose, right? So the technology itself might be ethical, but the way that is used or implemented because it serves a purpose from a business perspective is not. And it's hard sometimes to separate the two. And I think that you mentioned privacy, and that's a great kind of thought about what happened last week, I think. Time flies, where the Italian regulator banned chat gpt in Italy, not because of the technology of the AI per se, but because of the privacy issues that entails, because OpenAI had not asked permission,
Right.
especially to younger users, to use their personal data. And so, when you're talking about AI and regulators, what are the things that in your mind should be top of mind, where you are able to balance, continue to pursue innovation without at the same time putting concerns around the safety and the privacy of the users?
Right. I think it's a very important question and definitely many perspectives or ways of approaching it. But Carolina, one way that I really like to think about this is kind of starting with the front end, which is a really interesting way, I think, of first approaching it. I know that there are a number of teams that are also looking at it this way, but really, what is the information and the way that we are exposing AI models to users? I think explainability is definitely a crucial part of this, as well as transparency, and the other, terms that I mentioned are coming under the ethical AI domain. But just speaking to what you mentioned as well, with coming from my personal point of view, I think that having a clear understanding of how data is being leveraged, again, what exactly the model is doing when it's making an inference or a recommendation, and also information about how trustworthy or reliable it is, having all of that information upfront. Can be valuable to a user because they're able to make informed decisions. But this
Absolutely.
statement, yeah, it's not coming without caveats. How much information is too much information? An info like overload, or which stakeholder, which user needs to see what kind of information. So I think that's the first step. Just to quickly add. The second kind of point of view, I think, from a regulator's point of view, is looking at the breadth of AI systems, not only
Mhm.
general purpose, but also looking at the specialization of these systems for individual use cases and those individual requirements.
And you mentioned too much data, but there's also the opposite, which is
Right.
then linked to the fairness and the need for diversity in AI, which is the lack of data, right? Making
Agreed.
decision for certain groups where you don't have enough data to base it on, and so you're outcome is going to be off because you're lacking that data. Am I thinking about this right?
Exactly. And I think, again, even kind of extending that further, it's also about the impact that then that causes. We look at it from different perspectives, academic and industry and regulatory, et cetera. You're looking at potential harms, to people, if especially it's a medium to high risk use case like in healthcare, et cetera. You're also looking at, lack and loss of user trust, impact of revenue, et cetera. So a lot of factors that, industry cares about a lot, but also in very, medium and high risk situations, a lot of danger that can occur as a, result of that.
I love the point about trust because right now you already started to see some of that, right? Where,
Right.
there are moments where it doesn't matter what solution you're using, there's just excitement of this amazing thing that gets spit out at you that you ask. But there are moments where, like, hold on, you're getting math wrong. How can you get math wrong? um, but I don't know if it's a case of left and right brain, even for AI, that can be very smart on one end and seems really dumb on the other. But to your point, there's a level of trust that as a user, I'm gonna, have based on the results that I'm getting.
Right, agreed. And I think, and just bringing up the point you mentioned, because it's a fascinating connection, I think just connecting it back to kind of the left and right brain. And we know kind of with recent neuroscience research that that theory has since changed rapidly. So we know that there are different, I mean, I'm definitely not an expert on this, but just, from interesting kind of readings, there's definitely different areas of the brain that are activated when we're doing different tasks. I think it's very interesting to see how we're going to be able to mirror that with AI systems. Because again, I think exactly as you mentioned, and there's a lot of again terminology and concepts around this. One of this is Moravec's paradox, which is kind of, I think I've seen it summarized as, AI is really good at complicated tasks like beating masters at chess and Go, etc. But it is challenging for it to be able to stack blocks. So I think,
Mhm.
that type of phenomenon makes it very interesting to compare it to human intelligence, which we're seeing a lot, but also be able to say, how are you connecting different components of knowledge and continuously updating the models? We see this now, I think, with the plugin ecosystem being developed for ChatGPT. It's giving it access to a lot of updated data,
Yeah.
exactly as mentioned, Carolina. I think there's problems with fairness, though, data quality, the reliability, robustness, a lot of different attributes that we care about that we're not too sure about how to measure so that we know that the model is getting the right data.
And that's critical, right? Because it's is about the right data and correct data. Because
Exactly.
we have seen, results from a query being off because that's what is available out there. Is a bit like kind of fake news, right? It is
Right.
out there for the system to sieve and utilize versus sift through it and get rid of. And so as a human, I know that there's a lot of anxiety, but for me, the way I think about it, and I'd be curious about your take, is I'm becoming more, maybe I'm not the author anymore of whatever it is that I'm doing, but I am the editor. I am the one that has the responsibility to fact check, what the AI is going to give me, at least at these early stages, right? Where we're still not quite sure.
Agreed. Yep. And I think that, again, one of the key terminology that's being put out there is human in the loop strategies, where we always have, especially with the lack of reliability around AI systems outputs, however, performant and efficient it is, definitely having that fact checking throughout the process is critical. What we're also seeing that is very interesting is the importance of domain experts and
Yes.
subject matter experts rising, because they have a lot of domain expertise that I'm sure you could use to create a knowledge graph, but it's about being able to respond intuitively in certain cases to certain situations that we just don't see as part of AI models yet. So I think, Carolina, one of the core kind of parts of AI ethics that I see is continuing to grow is basically being able to create guardrails around these systems, but also, again, on the interface side and just the user experience side, how do we enable users to be able to kind of correct and provide more detailed feedback, so that the model can kind of learn as it goes, but we're also very clearly establishing the role of when you need a human. So it's not just, blind trust
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely critical. From a societal perspective, there's a lot of excitement right now, but I think there's a lot of fear too.
Right.
Maybe more on the work side, where there's concern about jobs being taken over, and maybe it's not a job, as a task, or certainly things are going to get disrupted. Right, the way that we work today is going to change going forward. How
Agreed.
do you think about that relationship between AI and society, and where do you think there's opportunity to maybe lift some people up using AI to improve people's life, and where there's risk?
Agreed. I think it's a very big question, and I think especially if you kind of go online, there's a plethora of perspectives that you're going to find on this. I think that there are some that argue, yeah, AI is only automating a certain portion of these tasks, and then there is kind of a balanced outcome. Whereas others are actually looking more long term and starting to make some forecasts around what capabilities would AI be able to kind of take on. I think just from a balanced outlook on this and knowing that there isn't a very concrete answer, and especially one that we all need to work towards collectively to find out. I think that I definitely think there is merit in the idea that AI is only capable of automating to a certain extent
Yeah.
from the capabilities we're aware of today. Tasks. I think that definitely there are opportunities to potentially elevate. Opportunities or capabilities for folks who could really use the technology. I'm actually thinking of accessibility related items. So for example, we've seen how capabilities like closed captioning or potentially translation or things like these could help folks who are disabled. So I think there is definitely an opportunity to help kind of supplement the current tasks, make it maybe easier to stop performing things that are menial, things that you don't really want to do,
Yeah.
like basic data entry or even writing
PowerPoint.
emails. Yeah. Exactly. And I think, and I know this perspective is mentioned a lot, but I definitely agree with it. Bringing out additional kind of creativity and elements that, we would all kind of like to spend more time on if we didn't have to deal with kind of the drudgery of, day to day stuff. So,
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that having that support to do the things that we need to do, because it's part of a process, but we don't necessarily take joy in doing,
agreed.
is where I get more excited. Um, you mentioned guardrail a couple of times, and I'm curious, because the way I think about it is that's kind of your job, right? In terms of what you do day in and day out at Intel. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, and how do you productize ethical AI?
Sure. And again, I think it's a unique perspective because industry always kind of has that. It's kind of like a spotlight on what we're capable of doing. I think the strategy that we're taking as part of, and my team is also taking, Carolina, is what can we do to enable the developer ecosystem in a way that helps kind of build technologies around these solutions, knowing that we cannot achieve everything using technology. I know, again, another term being put out there, techno solutionism. Technology and ethical AI in a lot more detail that we see. And so just to reiterate, that kind of boundary is how we're kind of governing the way that we are looking at ethical technology. So I would say one of the things that my team has been looking at is explainable AI technology, just starting at kind of the edges of AI ethics and starting to get closer to trustworthiness. How do we help develop tools that make it easier for developers and domain experts to be able to better access what's going on within models, and better understand the outputs of these? We also have a lot of teams across Intel that are working on diverse topics. So we have Ilke Demir and teams work on fake catcher around deep fakes and being able to pathfind research and kind of drive research in that domain for being able to combat misinformation. And also, some of the other efforts that we're working on are around sustainability in generative AI. As I mentioned earlier, energy efficiency and sustainability are a big part of ethical AI. And also with the size of these models increasing and the size of the data, it's becoming critical to be able to have compute that matches that. that. So that's something we're trying to take a kind of diverse perspective that's also evolving, kind of look to generative AI and ethical AI technologies in general, again with the goal of being able to help partners, developers, customers, and the entire ecosystem at large be able to better get a handle of what we need to do here and collectively work towards that outcome.
I love that because, if you're looking at equity,
Right.
and you're looking at both from a sustainability perspective and a cost perspective, we're getting excited about this stuff, but the compute power that is going to be necessary, is phenomenal. And that has implication on, from a sustainability perspective, on how much energy you're going to require and so forth. And there's a cost associated with it. So, right now, everybody seems to, as we trying to figure out way to monetize from it, making it available for free. That's not going to be always the case, right? And so how do you balance that as well? So I'm sure that the cost of some of these services, from an equity perspective, will become more top of mind.
Agreed. And yeah, I think it definitely reflects my personal experience as well, because I, came in from academia. When I was doing my master's, we played around with large language models all the time. And coming from that environment, you understand the limitations of budget, right? If you spend too much money on SageMaker or, some allocated cloud service that, you're using, you can rack up costs pretty quickly,
Yeah.
even when you're not training AI models. So I think definitely there is that kind of recognition that needs to kind of come at large around it's not feasible for everyone to be able to access large language models and even huge computer vision models as well in certain environments, especially those who are furthering research one step at a time. It can be very challenging in that case. So I have a couple of colleagues who refer to this really wonderfully around democratizing AI,
Yeah.
especially Ajay Mungara at Intel. I think it's kind of a wonderful way to kind of look at it, because there are, I think, different target groups that some people, don't necessarily think of right away, that are, again, furthering the state of art on AI, and they need more accessible kind of options cost-wise to be able to develop and look at and inspect these systems. So I think that will definitely become a bigger factor. So more of a comment, not really an answer to the overall question, but I think
Yeah,
it will,
no, I
yeah,
appreciate that. I want to switch gear for a second and
sure.
talk about women in AI. Obviously in tech, there's a diversity problem. But when I look at AI, and not just me, but a lot of people talk about a crisis, not just an issue.
Right.
The lack of diversity is actually a crisis in AI. Talk us through your career, because you obviously are an amazing, talented young woman who has, built and is building a career in AI. What did you see? What did you experience? And if you need to kind of pinpoint what the issues are they specific, or are they the same as we see in tech, and it's just that AI is such a much more specific area, and therefore it feels more like a crisis?
Thank you. I think it's a very interesting question. Just to think about it, I think it might be an answer to both questions. So I think just first looking at it from a generic kind of what do we see in tech every day? I think throughout kind of my academic career, but also in industry, there are definitely many cases where I was the only woman in the room. It can definitely be, I think, wonderful and inspiring to see women technologists, especially senior technologists, but also having junior peers as well, to be able to interface with very closely as you're building up your career, and also because you're able to speak with them regarding challenges that they faced, and also I think how to deal with adversity. That's definitely a key part. That's where I think AI is actually bringing some of its unique challenges, because as we just talked about, I think fairness, sustainability, etc. A lot of the concepts that we're looking at do require pushback as part of the AI domain. There are times when you're committing to deadlines, but even though you have that kind of structure, you do need to actually intercept from early on and start to think about ethical AI very, very early. So I think, and again, I've seen this kind of when data science and machine learning disciplines as well that are connected to AI, but also, a little bit more on the technical side and not very, very close to the hype. And we definitely, I am very inspired by seeing the women in my field being able to speak up and also, for example, start to create or provide recommendations that we previously hadn't thought about. I think it's very similar, Carolina, to also, folks who are really helping emphasize diversity as well. Again, I think it is a wide variety of perspectives that are being brought to the table in order to be able to say, hey, have you considered this potential use
That's
case? For
right.
example, right, someone with hair or, someone who has a different skin tone. Have you
Yep.
considered that for your computer vision algorithm? So yeah.
Yeah. So you tell me more about this because it should be obvious to people why we
Right.
need diversity. But continue with your examples. Is that we know in other fields, right? Why when you go and wash your hands in a bathroom, the hair dryer doesn't necessarily activate because your hands are too small compared to the male hands that have been trained on, things like that. Tell us more about specifically to AI why diversity matters.
Right. And just stemming off of that example, I think that's a perfect example to explain why. Because, we see these subtle kind of discrepancies that are being introduced, and we need to understand that computer vision is like, using like cameras and detecting objects. That's kind of the foundational technology that AI is being built on. So all of the subtle biases that we're seeing with, these, technologies that we're already kind of exposed to are being built into AI models. And these AI models are being given the possibility to actuate, or in other words, act in their environment, provide outputs, actively influence decision making. So while a soap dispenser or a hair dryer is probably not, having that impact to society, an AI model that is, even potentially, again, we're talking different variety of risk, whether it's like autonomous vehicles or drones or
Yep.
even healthcare, all the way even to gaming, where adolescents and like they're being exposed to this kind of content daily, or Instagram filters or something similar. There's a lot of impact there and scale as well. So I think even that fundamental example just illustrates how these biases, these subtle things, are being transferred over to systems that are capable of powerful decision making and influencing the way we think about the world. So to me, that's a very core example of why we need to be able to treat biases at different levels and also encourage diversity, because you're not able to see these issues and you don't want to see them after the technology is out there,
Absolutely.
right? Unless you
Yeah.
have the right perspectives. So,
Yeah, and because also often you will not be able to trace back, how that decision is being made and what bias influence that outcome. So it is absolutely critical. And I can't believe that we're almost at time already. It's been a fantastic conversation and so much knowledge. I have one more question for you though, which is linking the diversity aspect to what you were saying earlier about knowledge and a technology that it's so fast developing. When you're talking about diversity, oftentimes people talk about the pipeline issue, which is smoke and mirror in my view. Is not just the pipeline issue, but that is where we often look at. When it comes to AI, if you're thinking about acquiring knowledge, how do you think about it? Do you think that the current way that we look at education is the way to continue to look at disciplines like AI, or are we going to have to think differently about how we acquire our knowledge?
I think there definitely will be a shift going forward on how we acquire knowledge about AI, but also around the world in general. I know that, search engines were kind of the first kind of foray into the world of those possibilities where, I know that there's, a lot of kind of, talk about, nowadays, if you can Google it or if you can kind of search it, you don't really need to memorize it because it's, accessible to you. But there are some core skills that we continue to accumulate over time. I think AI is kind of continuing to enable that. Right now, we're thinking about it from a search engine perspective primarily, but we're looking at, again, not just in the language realm, in computer vision, and in many, many other spaces as well. I think definitely, Carolina, to connect it back to diversity as well, there is an inherent need for more and more feedback and contributing perspectives in a very informative way. And I've seen this shape kind of out over the past few years. It started with, thinking about science fiction and thinking about the impact that it would have, et cetera. I've seen debates kind of start out that way. I think especially, even 5 to 10 years ago, ethical AI kind of started from some of these kind of conversations that were continuously being had. Now we're starting to see it get to even more informed kind of practitioners, concrete perspectives. So I think AI education is really also being able to highlight the technical aspects as well as the importance of having that perspective and bringing it out. So I think overall it's becoming very holistic in my point of view. And I know this is a jumbled answer, but
No, not at
basically,
all.
yeah,
And I think that's really critical, right? Because people
right.
often think about this kind of topic as it's just technology, and it isn't, right? You have to have, a much broader understanding of society to actually make some of the decisions on the model and how you run it to get the output that you want. So it's not just
Agreed.
about coding or, data science.
Agreed. Yes. And I think, again, having those fundamentals in place is perfect. I love kind of the different efforts towards getting that ingrained as part of, middle school curricula, et cetera.
Yeah.
It's just wonderful to see. And then building on top of that to make sure that, no matter what, person you are, whether you're a developer or, you're part of the business, you're a business leader making decisions, or you're, a layperson to AI, just getting impacted by these systems, you are able to very, informatively speak about the technology, understand what it's doing, and be able to change it for the greater good, having those interfaces in mind. So that's the optimistic future. I'm very optimistic about the future of ethical AI because I think
I know
we have,
you are. Yeah.
so many
And I
great
think we
tools. So,
should be, right? The
right.
opportunity is so amazing as
Right.
long as we do think about the negative ramification that the technology can have and be as prepared as we can be. I absolutely delighted that you decided to come on today and spend 30 minutes with us. But I always say the conversation doesn't have to end here. So for people who are interested in following you and seeing what you get up to, but also know more about ethical and responsible AI, where can we find you?
LinkedIn is the perfect place to reach out, and I'm very happy to have conversations on this. Yeah, because it's an exciting field. We're in the middle of it. So
It
thank you,
is.
Carolina. Yeah.
No, it's my pleasure, and it's so exciting to have a woman who is building a career on this, and in such a delightful way as well. As I said, I always appreciate when I'm not made to feel stupid not understanding a topic. So
No, well, thank you.
thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you on another stage at Intel or somewhere else, given that you're a prolific speaker around this topic.
Oh,
Thank you
thank you so
very
much,
much, Ria. I
Carolina.
appreciate you.
Really appreciate it as well. Thank you.